Hey Potters, it's Word for Thought Pod, and this is our third podcast on the topic of Israel versus Palestine. I am your host, Nicole, and I'm here with special guest host,
Cenarit.
So I'm going to start off by giving you a brief history to my knowledge of the conflict. So firstly, the British owned all of the Palestinian land, or what can be considered now Palestine and Israel. Then the British gave back their land and gave designated land to both the Jewish and Arabs, which was supposedly the Gaza Strip and the West Bank, but it was not very clear. Then Jordan and Egypt took Palestinians' land, so the Gaza Strip and the West Bank, and then Israel had a 6-day war against Egypt, Syria, Jordan, Iraq, and Lebanon, and took back the Gaza Strip from Egypt, meaning the West Bank, took back the Gaza Strip from Egypt, the West Bank from Jordan, and Golan Heights from Syria. Then Israel gave Palestinians some rights and some level of autonomy in the Gaza Strip and the West Bank, and then continuously Israel slowly chips away at Palestinian land, growing their own territory. Then there was a war between the Gaza Strip and the West Bank, and they no longer work together. And terrorism between Palestine and Israel continues. Israel doesn't want to give Palestinians land because they are scared they will get too powerful and retaliate, as they are very vocal about their hatred for Israel. So you can correct anything I said that wasn't true, because I think you know a bit more about this than I do.
So personally, my family has had experience in this whole conflict in terms of the relations between Israel and Syria, especially with the occupation of the Golan Heights. But so far, it's all pretty accurate.
Okay, so I guess I could start off by asking you, whose side are you on?
Honestly, I've tried to be very impartial when I was learning about this whole issue and whole conflict, because obviously there are multiple sides to every story. And in terms of whose side I am on, I wouldn't really choose a specific side, because if I were to come up with the ideal solution to this, would be to have a two-state solution between Palestine and Israel. And also a big factor to know in this whole issue and conflict is the occupation of Jerusalem and which capital it's declared as. So Israel declares Jerusalem as Israel's capital, but then Palestinians are saying no, it's Palestine's capital. And then there's this even bigger issue when other world leaders start to pick which country to declare it as the capital. So that being said, I think that another good solution would be to just have Jerusalem, since it's rich in culture and history and a lot of religious history. I think the best solution for both parties would to just make it kind of like the Vatican City, for example, and have it, just not exclusive to one government or one state.
So about this two-state country you were talking about, can you go into a bit more detail?
Right. So I've personally had a lot of friends and interactions and, conversations with people from Palestine. And a lot of the times when you would hear is that, you can't really undo an entire country. So let's just say one specific country, and it doesn't matter which side, just say one country wants to take back that land. You can't really undo a whole country and say that, you don't own it anymore, this is not a country anymore. You just honestly can't do that, right? Common sense says you can't do that. So what I would suggest is to, have kind of an agreement, have relations with both parties, have, maybe a peace treaty, and, just maintain the culture that is already so prevalent in that area. And also respect the fact that, cities such as Jerusalem and just places in that area mean a lot to not just one culture or one religion. They mean a lot to a wide variety of groups of faith or a wide variety of cultures. So I think also keeping that in mind when reaching a consensus would be essential.
So basically what you're saying is you want to try and find peace between the two parties so that they're both happy and negotiate, basically, right?
Yeah, exactly.
However, I don't really think that's possible. One thing that happened to my dad was when he went to Israel, he was in a taxi and the cab driver was saying that he was just basically talking about the conflict, and he mentioned that you can't negotiate with someone who wants to kill you. So what are your thoughts on that?
Now, obviously, probably on the news, you've heard a lot about, conflict and more specifically the violence against, Israel and then the violence against Palestine. And honestly, it's very sad because what is now honestly just a political conflict is hurting civilians, families, and children that are not related to the decisions that are being made by each government. And, again, at the end of the day, each side sees their own, heroes. They all see their own, attackers or people that are trying to hurt them. And I won't lie to you, a lot of people have been hurt. A lot of people ranging from all of the different countries that are in that area. And that's another problem, is that I don't think that any defense forces or militaries should be attacking any other countries, in the name of defense. I think the first step to reaching a consensus or reaching an agreement and negotiating is to, tackle the whole violence aspect of it. And I think that it's a long way to go. You definitely can't just say, oh, let's stop violence and it's going to disappear within the next day. But yeah, I guess that's the closest to an answer that I can get.
Honestly, do you think it's possible?
The way it is now, I don't think so. When we talk about, a two-state solution or peace treaties or negotiations, it's easier said than done, and it doesn't happen overnight. I mean, you have to look back at when this conflict started, and it's been decades since this conflict has been going on, and it's to kind of reflect on all of that and see where it all started and where it is now, and kind of take in mind the time that it took, and think about, if we were to reach peace or if we were to reach an agreement, it's definitely not possible in the near future, I would say.
Damn. I just, feel really bad for all the families that are living in both of the countries because they can't really choose what's going to happen. They're not in control of it. So it's really just two countries terrorizing each other, and it's really only hurting the civilians, which is really screwed up to think about. But you said that your family has some sort of experience with this conflict, right?
Yes. So the experience that they have had is mostly in the 6-Day War, and I think it was in June of 1967. And so I don't know if you know this, but there is a, population of this ethnic group called Circassians, and they went through this whole war and genocide back in Russia, and so they were displaced and they had to go to various different countries. And so a group of them came to Syria, and they settled mostly in the Golan Heights and, other parts. So that's where, my family experience comes to play. And, my grandparents owned land in the Golan Heights, and, their business was there. Everything they owned was there. And then, overnight, you have this 6-Day War officially declared. Syrians are being displaced and forced to move to different parts of the country. My grandfather's land was it was gone. Now he had nothing to his name. You have 7 kids that you have to kind of find a new area for them to live in. And, my story, or my family's story, isn't the only experience or isn't the only harsh thing that families had to go through. There are thousands of different families, not just in Syria, that had to go through something just as bad, if not worse. And, a while back ago, I think the last time I was in Syria, which was in 2010, you can go and kind of see the Golan Heights from afar, but something that was always really interesting to me was that there is a line of UN soldiers that are there to, keep peace between the two borders. And I found that really interesting, especially at such a young age, seeing soldiers standing there and not really understanding what the issue was. But the more and more I realized, it's very interesting and intriguing to me to see that, as much as the UN is trying to help, there is still violence. You know what I mean? So it's kind of a sticky situation, I would say, right now. Mm-hmm. But yeah.
So with the story, I guess the bad guys would be Israel, right? For the story purpose.
For the story, I mean, yes.
So do you think that would influence your opinion or your bias against, or like for this conflict, depending on who you would side for? Do you think you have any negative bias against Israel because of your family's experience?
Honestly, I feel like that is one of the main points that I had to take into consideration when forming my own opinions. You know, my parents, they raised me and my sister to be able to be free thinkers. You know, they may have their own biases, or they may even have their own like political views on any issue going on in the world, but at the end of the day, they tell us, you know, go make your own decisions, but always make sure that that decision is the most impartial it can be. And I honestly am really grateful for that because, you know, as you said, my family has had experiences, but that honestly doesn't stop me from, you know, doing my research, looking at the statistics, at the facts of what's going on, and being able to form my opinion on this issue.
Okay, well, that's really nice. Two-state solution. What would that look like for you?
I can't really say what it would look like for me, you know, because obviously I don't live in either countries or either places. And again, we go back to saying that this would happen in like an ideal world, and it's realistically wouldn't be such thing in the near future. But like I said, you know, both areas would be able to prosper, to live, you know, free of violence, to live very peacefully, and, you know, having agreements between one another. And I think the main point is that, let's just say that there was a two-state solution and they were able to reach an agreement. You also have to look at the demographic of people. They're still going to have, you know, their biases. They're still going to, you know, have their own opinions on one another. So that's also another thing you need to consider. So in terms of what it would look like, I don't have a definitive answer for you, because there's just so much to keep in mind when thinking of that.
So I personally don't think that if you were just to like have an agreement and make it all one country, it would work. Like, it just definitely wouldn't, even if both countries were to have some sort of say in government. I think, although I don't necessarily know how fair it would be for Israel to just give Palestinians land and let them have their own like autonomy to self-government, because I just feel like just no sort of negotiation is going to work out, especially because both parties are so vocal about, you know, their hatred for each other, and there's so much terrorism going on right now between both parties. So I just don't think that any sort of negotiation is going to actually take place. And I'm talking realistically, not in a perfect world, because in a perfect world they wouldn't hate each other, and you can't be one country and you can't help each other out if you hate each other. So I just think that Israel should give Palestinians some land and not chip into it as they're doing so right now, and they should just let them have complete self-government. And I think that's basically the only way it's going to work out. However, there is this huge risk that Israel is really taking into account of Palestinians retaliating. Because what happens if you give them their own country, and then they can start building, and it's their own people, right? So they all collectively do not like Israel. They hate Israel. They want to kill Israel. What happens then? Will Israel be at risk of a lot of killing? Do you think there would be a war? And then there also comes like, then you also have to consider the whole thing about fairness. Does Israel deserve their land? Or does Palestine deserve it? Like, does Israel owe the land to Palestinians?
So for the first question, you said about like, what if, you know, Palestine had their own like complete self-government and now they want to like retaliate, you know? Mm-hmm. Honestly, there are so many layers to this conflict. You know, on one hand, it's political. And then on the other hand, you know, there's a lot of religious factors in there, you know, and especially with like, again, Jerusalem, you know, it's a very sacred place for both Jewish and Muslim and even Christian communities. So when you're looking at how they are being vocal about, let's say, quote unquote, their hatred, you really have to look at it from which aspect. Is it from like, you know, you're taking our land, or is it from, a religious aspect? That's what's really tricky. And honestly, I can't, speak for everyone that is involved in the conflict. I really can't speak for everyone that has their own opinions on the topic. But a while back ago, I think the IDF, the Israeli Defense Forces, sent out some of their soldiers to fight back, and everyone said it was for the sake of protecting their land, protecting its people, and that makes sense, right? Any country would fight back if it were being under attack, or even if it weren't, but it sensed some sort of insecurity. But when you look at the aftermath of these quote unquote fighting back, so many children were hurt, so many families were harmed, killed. So again, it's very hard for me to answer that, because how do I say this? It's a very complex issue. You have to look at everyone that's being affected by it, right? Mm-hmm. And sure, there have been, attacks on both sides, but at the same time, you have to look at who's being attacked, who's honestly being hurt, the children, the families, civilians that don't want anything to do with it. So again, that whole fear of, retaliation, I think at this point, people just want to live with peace. They just want to prosper.
Do you really think that?
I mean, I've seen people that have gotten out of that area, and honestly, they tell you that things at this point have gone so bad for them that they want to just live in peace. But again, to keep this, very impartial, that is just, a group of people and their opinions. I can't speak for the people that want retaliation, because obviously I don't know what that is like. I don't know the, the motives behind it, but yeah. And sorry, what was your second question?
It was about whether Israel owes them their land or not, because I know it's very messy. Like, historically, it's very messy, and there's no cut and clean lines as to what was whose territory in the first place. And then the whole 6-Day War came, and then Jordan and Egypt took Palestinians' land. So it was just all very messy, and I don't really know what is owed to who.
So I completely agree with you 100%. It's very messy, and it's been going on for such a very long time that honestly it's hard to keep track of. And I'm not a complete expert on this topic. There are limitations to my knowledge on it, but I can tell you right now that the whole 6-Day War against all these countries displaced a lot of people. It killed a lot of people, and so many people were left with nothing. So the way that was done, I don't agree with it. Again, like, have you ever heard of overnight you lose your house, you lose your investments because, that is the area that you had all your businesses in? Mm-hmm. It's very bizarre to think of it that way. So, I don't know, and I don't want to speak in terms of who owes what who. But I definitely think that there have been some methods of occupation or displacement or, fighting that I don't agree with, and think that they had a very, very harsh impact on a lot of people.
So, I could be wrong, but I'm kind of sensing a bias that basically you think that Palestinians deserve their land back, or Syrians deserve Golan Heights back, right?
Yeah, I definitely agree with, getting land back, or just freeing occupations of pieces of land. But I don't think that it should be done through violence whatsoever. Because I can tell you right now that there are some groups of people that think that it should be done through a war, through fighting, through violence, but I don't agree with that. But again, if we want to talk in terms of, how realistic solutions were, could you think of any other way without harming people? So it's very tricky, because I know for a fact that if someone were to get their land back, or if a group of people were to get their land back, I would hope for it to be as peaceful as possible for both parties, for sure.
I guess the only way that's possible is just for Israel to give it back, right?
Yeah, you could say that. But then how would its citizens feel? Israelis, how would they feel? You know?
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, there will be an uproar caused. Yeah.
Interesting. You know, another reason why Israel doesn't want to give them back their land is because of money, right? Because a war is very expensive, right? But I feel like the only way Israel would actually give them their land back, or give them land, is if they realize that it would be cheaper for them to go to war than to continue supporting so-called Palestinian territory at the moment. Because right now Israel is really the only party that is paying for things like sewage or like other necessities in places like the Gaza Strip and the West Bank. For example, they paid for sewage, right? And then, which means like, you know, pipes and all. But then Palestinians took these pipes and turned them into missiles to try and hurt Israelis. And so then Israel was like, okay, you know what? Screw that. What we're going to do instead is we're going to build an area for you guys to deposit your waste, but we're gonna kind of gate it off with a bunch of sand. Then what Palestinians did was they took the sand and they tried to make it into concrete to build their own houses. So basically everything Israel is doing right now is taking up a lot of money to support the Palestinian areas, and then Palestine is either using this to hurt Israel or for their own benefit. However, if they were to go to war, it actually might be cheaper. And because Israel, like as with any other country, well, for the most part, would want to do the cheapest thing possible, I think that that's basically the only way they're going to give them land.
Now, that's actually very surprising because I haven't heard of, you know, the sewage story or the sand story. And, I mean, yes, war can be cheaper at times than, you know, the other options that you have as a government. But that's talking in terms of it costing you money. Now, the terms of, you know, costing it people's lives, that's another story to tackle, you know? And you said that it might be cheaper for Israel to just go to war, right? Again, you can't really at this point predict the outcome of how, let's say, if one party went at war, how the other is gonna react or counteract, and you can't really just kind of think of, okay, what's the next step? So at this point, we can sit here and, you know, predict, okay, let's say Israel went to war or Palestinians did this and that. You know, it's always going to be this kind of piece of mystery as to what's going to happen next. And it's really unfortunate because, you know, you have people there that don't know what's going to happen with their lives. You have, you know, areas that no one knows what they're going to be counted as part of. You don't know what's going to happen. And it's honestly very unfortunate.
I also just want to include that Israel isn't only doing things to help Palestinians out. That was just one example. Israel definitely has a big part in the terrorism that is taking place in between the two countries. So no, Israel isn't all in the good and just trying to help out the Palestinians. That's just not the case. But about what you were saying is the cost of people's lives versus the cost of money in terms of war. Do you think they care?
Honestly, no. No. Look at any war that ever happened. Look at all the deaths, all the people that were left without homes, left without parents, left without family, that were sick, that just, you know, no. And it's sad. It hurts to say that, but it's honestly, that's
the truth.
Yeah, it is what it is, you know.
Yeah, and that's why I'm saying I think that's the only reason why Israel would actually just give them land. Because even if you do give them land, there is a chance that Palestinians will be okay with it and they might not retaliate. The chances of that are pretty slim, but it's possible.
Yeah, so we go back to this whole thing of, like, taking chances and, you know, predictions of what's going to happen next. And, you know, even if someone, I do have to add that even if someone is biased or, you know, is in favor of one scenario than the other, they can also oppose the actions of, governments and parties and groups. And I just want to say that, every single party has a role to play, both negative and positive roles.
Okay, Potters, that's all I have for you guys today. Thank you very much, Cenarit.
Thank you for having me.
Feel free to follow us at Word for Thought Pod on Instagram and leave a comment or DM us with any question you have. And stay tuned for the next podcast coming up. Thank you.